चलो मर्द और औरत के बीच का अंतर मिटाते हैं। चलो मर्द और औरत के बीच का अंतर मिटाते हैं, कम से कम हमारी बातों में। सोचते हैं, पूछते हैं कि जब साली आधी घरवाली होती है, फिर क्यों देवर आधा वर नहीं? जब साली आधी घरवाली होती है, फिर क्यों देवर आधा वर नहीं और भाभी मां समान होती है, जीजा जी बाप पर नहीं?
Hello everyone. You would be a little curious who was speaking just a few seconds back. It was the voice of Sajal Kumar. He is an IIM Kozhikode pass out, currently a full-time screenwriter. After IIM-K, he was part of the corporate world for a few years. He has worked with giants like Airtel, Reliance, but then his love for screenwriting made him choose the career path of screenwriting full-time. He writes poems, he writes dialogues. His recent venture with for a web series called as Mukesh Jasoos, which was recently uploaded on Hotstar, is super famous with an IMDb rating of 7.5. So he had collaborated with Vinay, who is also a IIM-K pass out. So welcome Sajal Kumar on board, and let's have our first question from Akshat.
Thank you.
Sajal, we all know what a transformational journey IIM-K provides. So what was your journey throughout the institute, and what was the key takeaways? And we hear that you were an integral part of the Theatrix group at the time. So how was the entire journey for you?
Yeah, some people who know about my experience during those days even joke that I did my MBA not in marketing or finance. I did my MBA in theater. It's kind of a running joke in my friend circle, because I was I don't know, it wasn't a very conscious choice. I entered into a college which was 13 years old and had almost no theater culture before that. I've heard that one or two plays had happened years ago, but practically there was no theater culture. But in my engineering, I had some good experiences. I just wanted to continue if possible. I believed that it's going to be very hectic, it's going to be very challenging, but it was like dekhenge, try karke dekhenge. If it happens, it happens. And one thing led to another, and before we realized, we did close to 16 theaters. I think 16 theater performances over a period of 1.5 years approximately, which just happened. I mean, I still think of it and I feel that it's impractical to do something of this sort in an MBA college. But we did it. We traveled to different campuses. We went to MICA Ahmedabad, we went to IIM Bangalore, we went to IIT Madras, and we started this thing called theater evenings, where we would just have one play, and for that people would come up. And there was so much pressure of assignments, submissions, deadlines. Uske beach, people coming and attending. When we were doing it for the first time, we really felt that every person who would come because we would have called them up. We would have to tell our friends, please come and watch. And that is how it started. But by the third theater evening that we were doing, which was Importance of Being Earnest, that play, by that time we were having full houses. So it was packed. People used to even stand and watch, and I think it just has remained with me. Just looking back at that period, and the studies were fine. I had a PPO, so I was technically one of the earliest people to get placed, because PPO came pretty early and all. So everything was smooth along these lines also, and along with that, doing something that I liked, and doing it in a manner where it started with just a small group of people trying to do it once, to a scenario where it became a culture of the campus. In 1.5 years that happened. So that just stayed with me. Even now, when I look at just handling creativity in a sensible, professional manner, those experiences come to my mind. I think about those times. I mean, how I was handling those things, and fond memories and useful learning.
So currently you are the content development head of Yuvaa, and before this, you were also part of a startup. So just tell us a bit about your corporate journey and what made you like what gave you confidence to give up the corporate world, corporate uh, such rich world to do this full time, because this is a creative field where success is not guaranteed, and it's a very hard decision, very difficult to make it completely go one side. You either you try to balance out both the things, but you choose to do what you love, which was writing. So just take us a bit your current job, your current content development at Yuvaa, and plus how did this switch, how did this confidence came up?
So even when I was starting my MBA, that was a period when I'd started thinking about the idea that I want to do something creative in the long term. So during my MBA interviews, there was almost like a phrase that I had invented for myself. I used to say that I want to be an impact artist, whatever that is supposed to mean. I used to say I want to be an impact artist, and that's why I want to do, learn management and how markets operate, and use creativity in that manner and all that. And in all the interviews where I said this, I was rejected. IMK was one interview where they did not ask why MBA, and I was selected. So, so that was always there at the back of the mind that this is something I will do. I had this sense that these many years you will take to pay off the education loan. Those practical considerations were there. So around 5 years is what I always had in my mind. In 5 years, I will try and get into it, and more or less that is what happened. And I also thought that if corporate world excites me enough, if it's tempting enough, okay, maybe I will continue. So that option was always there. Maybe probably for the first year and a half, it even did excite, because coming from a middle class background, you start with a salary which is 3 times what your father retires at. So it's a proper transition that happens at financially and at a lot of levels. So usme, as you said, to just leave all of that behind, and when I eventually started, it started as proper struggling writer, what you would call it. So that call, there were two things. One, the education loan was almost paid off. So that was the practical bit of it. Second, I also did try and manage both worlds. So one of those steps was, the startup that I was part of was actually a creative startup. It was a talent discovery platform. And it was a small initiative. I just tried it out. If that flies, it flies, but it didn't. So then the other option was I explored teaching for a while, because I thought teaching is that kind of a profession with which I can do writing. I was teaching MBA coaching students, and it was also something that I enjoyed. So I enjoy teaching mathematics. I enjoy mathematics in general. I enjoy teaching mathematics. So I was a maths faculty, and but even there, I realized that it's like the second favorite thing that I'm doing. The favorite still remains writing, and still needs, maybe not necessarily needs your full-time attention to get your work out. But if you want to just spend your entire day as a writer, is what I realized. I wanted that feeling. I just wanted to spend, the entire day, if I'm thinking about it, if I'm doing something, if I'm wasting my time, all of it as a writer. So that's the life I wanted to live. And I knew that it will be a little tricky. I was a little impatient. I used to feel that, agar ek do saal mein, if I don't get a big project, something big doesn't happen, then maybe I will have to go back to what I was doing. But then one thing leads to another. You realize certain things, you become a little more comfortable. You are not that impatient. You realize that this is something that you want to do for 40, 50 years if you live that long. And then you suddenly feel that, this is too much to do. There's a lot that I would be doing. And that's why this 5-year journey is just, I think of it as in much more relaxing way. And in this journey, there's been the step of, joining a firm called Yuvaa, which is a media organization, which is doing quite well in the short form space, Instagram, YouTube, and such space. It's basically about youth-oriented issues. I just felt it's that kind of a place which will tell stories which are relevant. I mean, I I had started to realize that, this is a career that I will be able to make. As a career, I can see myself doing it for the next 30, 40, 50, whatever years. That would work. But then the next question is just doing that work which will be relevant, which will make you more happy. So Yuvaa happened along, at that kind of time. And so I'm handling the long format piece of it, the shows and the films, wo wala space. So it's just started. It's like a little more than a month that I've joined them full time, and before that, for a few months, I've been developing a few projects on a freelance basis for them. So good going. We are in talks with Amazon for a show which is going along well. We are, pitching a few other ideas in different places, and I'm hoping that in the next year or two, we will see some exciting stuff that will come up.
Interesting, interesting. Sir, just take us through your creative writing journey. When you write, when you sit to write, say, a street play or a stage play or a poem. We just heard your poem. There are 3 or 4 poems which are available on YouTube, and I'm sure you must have written hundreds of them. And the writing of a web series, which the Mukesh Jasoos, which was around 20 episodes. So how is it different? How long does it take to write each one of them? How creatively inclined you have to be? Do you have a switch on, switch off thing, or do you have to do everything else? Like go about like, do you consider writing as a day job, or is it something like you're a method writer? When you are into the zone, no one is allowed to disturb you.
No, I consider it as a day job. I think any professional writer has to consider it as a day job. It is a task eventually. I mean, at different points in our journey, we realize it, but it is a job like any other job. Maybe the timings will be a little more flexible. If I were working in an office and my work hours end, I wouldn't want to sit on that work again. But with writing, even at 11 o'clock, sometimes I would just want to sit with a story and spend time. So it's just my motivations and my inclinations would vary, but it's like a job like anything else. And most of the writing, most of the screenwriting and screenwriting is what I do professionally. The poetry is something that I've done, so I still kind of revisit it sometimes. I kind of there are places in Mumbai which have these events, poetry events. So I would just walk into one of those events, perform a bit. But that is something more of I have done. I've written a bit, so might as well go and share it. So that kind of stuff. But screenwriting is what and even plays. So plays I wrote a bit during my college days. But once I got into writing professionally for just practical reasons, because theater, it's very difficult to make it commercially viable. So it was just a prudent call that I would focus on screenwriting, which at least has the ability to pay better as compared to theater. Even though I still get very excited about plays and stuff, but that is something that I've really not done professionally. So professionally, it has been screenwriting, and the process would also vary. There are 2 types of writing that we do. One is we prepare a concept or a story or an entire script, and we would pitch it, which is called writing. Speculative writing is the term. So that is a very different kind of a thing. If you get busy in something else, some other project comes, you can sideline it and everything. And the other thing would be a project for which you are hired. So those are 2 different. Mukesh Jasoos was a project for which I was hired. RVCJ, there is a mini series called When You Meet Your Ex, the 3-episode thing. That is something that I wrote myself and I shared with them, and it eventually got made. Those are 2 very different. So Mukesh Jasoos is a 20-episode thing that I wrote in 15 days because I had to write it in 15 days. We just had that kind of time. We didn't have any more time than that. We had a deadline of submission, so we had a deadline of shoot, so we had a deadline of the writing process to be completed, which gave us just 15 days, which is strange, it's almost sounds impossible writing 4 hours content, but we did it, and I think we did a fairly okay job at it. So, and if I compare it to something like When You Meet Your Ex for RVCJ, I wrote it at a time, and it eventually got made more than 2 years after it was written. So for 2 years, it was being pitched around, it was being shared. And there's a lot that I've written during those days that is yet to be made, and most of it will never be made. So that's also part of a screenwriting journey, that this realization that most of our writing will not get made. It will just, but it will be a good stepping stone for us. It will become our writing samples. Initially, it makes us very uncomfortable to think that I've written something and it might not get produced. But after a while, we become very comfortable. I think most writers become very comfortable. I'm at a place where I'm very okay with the fact that almost everything that I've written so far, maybe it will never get made, and I'm okay with it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't bother me. I know that there will be enough and more projects that will keep coming, and there is a lot of joy and satisfaction in that also. So that is it. And yes, the writing process is, most of the writing is just thinking what will work well. We have a certain understanding of storytelling, and just using that understanding to build something that will have the emotional and dramatic impact that we want to create. That is what we spend most of our time thinking. That is what we are discussing a lot of time. From a distance, it might seem that writing is some बहुत emotional hona, or I don't know, becoming very sad or becoming very funny if you're writing something funny. But most of it is none of that. It's just there's some understanding that we have acquired, and different writers have different process. For me, it's been self-taught. I've read a lot. I haven't attended a lot of workshops. I've not done a formal course, but I've read close to 30 books about writing in cinema over the past 5 to 6 years. So that's been my training. I just keep reading, keep analyzing, and based on that understanding, just try and put that into whatever you're writing and try and make it as effective as you can. So that's the process. And when the deadline comes, try and submit it within the deadline, or mostly just don't be too late.
I think it did not eventually matter when you said that when you meet your ex ka, it was written 2 years ago and then eventually it made after a gap of 2 years, because I think the content was relevant, because I remember watching it at the time when I had just came out of a relationship, and it perfectly made sense for me. And I'm sure for the years to come also, it is a perfect. I don't want to ask you कि आपका personal experience था कि नहीं, but very.
Who know me know that it's kind of a known thing around me that it is inspired from a personal experiences, and that is where the emotional truth even comes, because one of my favorite writers, Charlie Kaufman, said that is something that we are trying to do as writers. We are trying to make our personal universal. So trying to find our own vulnerability, sharing it with the world, which makes the audience feel less lonely. As you're saying, you would have seen somewhere, and that is one of those works which I'm genuinely very proud of, because I still go back to the comment section, I look back at the responses, and there are so many people who have been moved. There are people who have taken relationship decisions based on this video. There are people who say that this is like a life lesson for them. There are people who have personally told me that it has been a healing process for them watching these videos. So, and you won't be able to write too many such things, because हमने कितनी जिंदगी जी है. These are a few emotional voids and wounds that we have, and that we can put into writing, and to this extent. Otherwise, it will, as I said, most of the writing will be that only. We have some understanding of drama and some understanding of emotional impact, and just trying to make our stories more and more effective along those lines.
On the lines of making stories more effective, I was just wondering, how do you as a writer identify some stories which need to be told and some stories which, while writing process only, you would come to know that, yeah, this is a story which needs to be told or propagated further. And some stories are like, okay, this is a good piece, but maybe in the current times, it's not that apt. So how do you come across those stories, and how do you identify those, potentially moving stories or moving writing material?
Yeah, so usually my focus is on this phrase called emotional truth. So this is something which is kind of timeless. The idea of ambition, the idea of love, the idea of family, and so the friendship variables, these things will always remain timeless. So most of these stories, I don't think that the if they are coming from emotional spaces, they will not become redundant. What happens usually is that if we have thought of it a few years back and we grow as writer, we learn, especially during the early days, this initial 5 years, तो बहुत ज़्यादा learning happens. I don't know to what extent that marginal utility, as we call in economics, वो कितना आगे continue होगा. But initially it is very significant. The kind of writer I was after 2 years and the kind of writer I was after 4 years of my journey, that is very significantly different. But maybe it won't be that different in the times to come. So now what happens is a lot of stories that I've developed earlier, I look back and I can find flaws, but those flaws are different. Those flaws are dramatic flaws. I can identify why it will not create that kind of impact. That maybe, for example, there's something which is, personally relatable and it touches my heart, but I've not converted it into dramatically engaging and moving kind of a material. So I just look back at it. If life allows that time and luxury, then I would probably go back and change a few things sometimes. If that story is very important, I would do that. And sometimes I would just say, okay, if it doesn't get made, it doesn't get made. So that's fine. It's mostly about that. I'm far more comfortable about the idea that a lot of stuff that I've written will not get made. Because the journey itself of writing and trying to learn from that has been very useful. When I look back at it, it's all a part of process. It's very, very important. Some of the stuff which is not great, but you have worked on that, that's very important. So, and the second thing is like identifying stories, one important call that we as writers, we need to take is something that I was talking about, the speculative scripts versus the project writing. So whether we are looking for projects to write, or whether, for example, if I'm working at Yuvaa, we would be developing a lot of concepts and we would be pitching it to platforms. So a lot of what stories we would be working on is a couple of people would be taking that call. For me personally, that is a little more preferable. I've always enjoyed that a little more, even though this reduces, the frequency at which your work will probably come out, because you're not directly getting assigned to a project which is already getting made. The other approach would be, once you get reasonably discovered as a writing talent, then you just go out and push yourself in the market and say, I want to pick projects. Then a lot of those projects which will come, which it might not be something that, because if you look at the work that is happening, there is a small percentage which is really, really exciting. A lot of work will be okay. But as a writer, then if you want to do those projects, you take up those okay projects also, you do a lot of that. So that's a call. It would vary from person to person, and also from the same person. At different points in my life, that call will vary. For example, during the COVID phase, the last year, there's a period of a few months when the projects were not really happening. The discussions were happening, but they were not getting finalized. Maybe because I was getting a little unlucky, or maybe because the way industry was reacting during those times. And that is when those thoughts started to come. Okay, I will want to pick up projects. I would want to go that way. So those things will keep on happening. A lot of it, as I said, is a practical call rather than just an emotional call as to this story has merit, this story doesn't have merit. It's more of a practical thing, at least for me.
Sir, it cannot be a case that we talk about your journey. We started talking about your journey from IIM-K, and we not mention about your favorite professor, EF Matthew. So take us maybe one anecdote or one incident, or maybe the entire journey, just briefly about your entire batch, Theatrix group, and then EFM Matthew.
Yeah. So what happened at K? I think when we entered, there's this junior-senior interaction that happens in hostels. So Ghoste Hi. And there I did this. I said these Gunda film ke dialogues and all. So and the seniors are very impressed. They were making videos and all. So suddenly it was a very different kind of an entry that happened, and seniors were talking about it. Just couple of days. The first weekend at IIM-K, I acted in a media cell which is now called PR cell. So media cell was the name back then. Media cell orientation video was made, and that video was very different. It was a very quirky. It has been uploaded by the alumni committee recently, and it's you should check that out. It's very बहुत ही अनोखा सा कुछ था. So that happened on fourth or fifth day of my college, and just a few days later, Rubaru happened, where I did a couple of things. The play that happens, the stand up that happens, and all that. So suddenly, and I wasn't expecting this to happen. That 15 days in an IIM Kozhikode like campus, and people around me know that this is a creative guy. This was almost coincidental, but I think that kind of paved way for a lot of things that followed. It just gave me that confidence. It just made me feel that it's possible that those things can be pursued here also. And then so as I said, theater wasn't a thing back in the campus, but Matthew sir used to be a visiting professor back then. He was permanent faculty at IIMK Ahmedabad. And so he took STI class, he went back, and I used to think about him. I wanted to meet him, and I was waiting that after a few months he would be coming for the next course and all. And then there was some senior who told me that in Micah there's a theater event that is happening. So I had written a couple of plays I sent, and in fact both my scripts were selected, and there was a street play also that got selected. So there were 3 entries that I sent, all 3 were selected. Which is very interesting because Micah gets a lot of entries. It's one of the hub of cultural activities. But it wasn't possible to do all of that because there was nothing called a theater team. There wasn't a theater team that existed at IIMK. We just got together. There was a batch mail that was sent that, there's a play by someone from our college which has been selected at Micah, and we want to perform that, and let's have a meeting. Auditorium ke niche, I remember, that is where we had met, and we had a chat, and we knew like it's a 30-hour journey one side, and we would be missing a quiz. I think it was some economics related quiz that we had missed. So all those things, but I was just excited. I just wanted to go and perform there, and of course meet Matthew sir. So we just went there, we did the play, and the kind of competition we had was crazy. DU colleges which were doing extremely complex plays, and I mean, one of them eventually won the contest and all. And then, but it was December 2010 that we performed, and then we came back, and then one thing led to another, because the same play we performed at IIMK as the first theater evening, which we called Rangmanch, which we used to call Rangmanch, that continued for years after that. So it became the first. It's called Wo Ek Zinda Aadmi Tha. In fact, that play is inspired from a German story, from which a film called Chehre has been inspired, which recently released. Amitabh Bachchan ki film hai. It's not very popular, but there's a film called Chehre which recently released on OTT or something. That's exactly the same story. So that was the play that we did, and then it was just trying to make things happen. Just getting together, doing one play after another, and I just loved. I just really enjoyed it. We had a Hindi magazine that was published, which had writings of people in the campus. We had a poetry event that we did, which was like a poetry open mic at a time when we didn't know what a poetry open mic was. So we just, got together in auditorium, and it was a 2.5 hour long event where people just read poems that they had written. So yeah, that's as I said, looking back, it just feels like theater में course किया था rather than MBA में course किया था. And I've also stayed in touch with a lot of people across batches, both from my engineering college as well as my MBA college, and I still try and do that. So I still try and encourage, motivate, whatever, if I can do it in any way. So I met like Suhani is someone a few years junior of mine who is an actress and also works in a bank full time. And I met her a few days back. There's Nikhil Sachan, who is a writer, who's been a friend for almost 15 years. He's been a very old friend. So there's a lot of people who are doing, things, and a lot of people who hopefully would do things, maybe part time, maybe full time. It would vary from person to person. But yeah, and I also think that the fact that if you do a lot of creative things, the exposure that people get from the batches, it also affects them even if they don't take that up. Because I used to observe that a lot of people from a batch used to watch a lot of plays. They would and many of them told me that they had never seen a play before they came to IMK campus, because this is not something that we commonly experience. If you, especially if you are in a small town, these are things that we are not experiencing. So those kind of small contributions also you make, you look back at it and you just feel good about it.
Wow, it seems like an impeccable IIMK journey, and the transition that you have had is just wonderful. From being in a corporate life to succeeding in a creative world. We thank you, Sajal sir, for actually taking your time and embracing us with your thoughts.
Thank
Thank
you for
you,
having me. Thank you.
and thank you to all the viewers.